Line.
Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to another edition of Newsline. Of course, with the domestic debt optimization program, there have been various views expressed by various factions, be it in Parliament, be it outside, experts, so on and so forth. But whatever said or done, Sri Lanka's debt needs to be restructured. There has to be some plan. And of course, a plan has been presented now. Like it or not, it has been passed in Parliament. Now, to discuss on this plan, the consequences, the pros, the cons of this plan, and how it will affect each and every one here in Sri Lanka, we have with us an expert, of course, in the field, the CEO of Advocata, Dhananath Fernando. Thank you very much, Dhananath, for joining us on this show.
Thank you, for having me.
Dhananath, let's start off with this domestic debt optimization program that was passed in Parliament. Now, the biggest allegation against this program is the fact that it touches the EPF, the ETF and other funds set up by private companies as well, and that banks have not really been, the burden has not been equally shared among banks as was agreed in the IMF program to have transparent and equal burden sharing. So, well, you definitely know better on this plan than any one of us. What do you think? Is that allegation fair?
Charlene, in my view, it's a combination of lot of perspectives, because when you select, and also it's two bitter choices. I mean, either whatever the choice that you're going to make, of course, you will upset the other side, because it's a decision between whether we are going to share the burden on the domestic debts amongst whom. So central bank has taken some burden. They have taken, the EPF funds have taken some burden. On the domestic front, the banks and the other bondholders haven't taken. But if you ask to take the banks a little bit more bear on the debt burden, then again one can argue, okay, what if the banking stability become unstable, because about 36% of the interest income for banks are coming from the government securities that they have invested. So those sides are there, but in my view, my worry is, I think this may not be adequate for us to reduce the debt burden overall. It is not about banks or EPF, because we are just trying to reach the bare minimum of 95% debt to GDP ratio and 12.7% of these gross financing needs. The worst could be where we have to go for another debt restructuring after a few years, if this is not adequate.
Right.
And the data also shows that most of the countries who have gone through the first debt restructuring, they go for a second and a third consequent debt restructuring. The second and third would be much difficult than this, because you have to restructure already restructured bonds and debt. That would be much difficult. So in my view, I think overall it is not, in my view, it's not adequate, but it's not adequate in the point that we might have to go for another debt restructuring, and no government wants to take up a debt restructuring plan. They would do it as your last option. It's like a heart surgery. No one really wants to take a heart surgery. But when you do it, you want to do it for once and for all. But I think what governments do is, they basically do it just for the sake of doing it and push it for the next 5 years, because then they can get the political capital. That's how I see it overall in this context.
So, Dhananath, you're bringing in a little bit of a new perspective into this, because generally the debates yesterday in Parliament, inside and outside Parliament, of course, focused on who should share the burden. And then the biggest arguments that came out was that the EPF and the ETF have been burdened too much. Those are funds of just common people, private sector employees, who don't have a say in whether or not they like this program. And that banks should have taken more of the burden. But now what you're saying is that the burden that was shared in whichever way among banks, CPF holders and all of that is not enough. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Because on the other side, Charlene, already the domestic debt has been restructured before this plan through inflation. Because when you have very high inflation, from your EPF money, if you were supposed to, withdraw 300,000
rupees.
Exactly, about 3 years ago, and if you are withdrawing the same 300 rupees now, what you could have bought for 300,000 then could have been probably 50% or 1/3 now. So already it has been in a way restructured, not only the EPF money, everyone else's assets value. We all have become poorer by this high inflation, because when inflation is at 60%, it doesn't make sense. And also, I think what the people could have asked, because now the debt restructuring plan, they have assured 9% return for EPF money. I think this 9% doesn't make any meaning without comparing it with inflation. Because if you have 20% inflation and if you are assuring 9%, pretty much you are losing 11%. Because your prices are increasing at 11%, your money increasing at only 9%. But it is much better if you can assure a 4% interest rate or a 5% interest rate and assure a 9%. So even if you assure 12% or 15% interest rate, if the inflation is 20-25, it doesn't make any sense.
So, but then that's kind of the argument of the government, right? The central bank governor said by September they're expecting inflation to drop down to single digits, and they're expecting to maintain that sort of inflation throughout the coming years. So in that light, isn't it fair for the government to offer 9% and say we're going to keep it single digits? Well, 9% would be the highest single digit inflation, so I'm presuming that they're expecting lower than that. Doesn't that make sense?
No, that makes sense, but the challenge is, what's the assurance? Imagine if the inflation goes above 5% or above 9%. What's the assurance? Because central bank, they have promised to keep it at below 9%, or like keep single digit. But there's no assurance. So I think ideally it could have promised something pegged with the inflation. We provide you an interest rate, ideally
2% above inflation or 1% above inflation.
I think if you look at the Sri Lanka development bonds, they have said 1% plus SLFR, that is the interest rate provided by the government. They are providing 1% plus for that. So likewise, I think that could have been another discussion. But in my view, just 9% won't make any sense without considering the inflation. Also, Charlene, this debt restructuring also need to look at in the context of the new central bank independence bill that is also going to get passed. Because according to the new central bank bill, if it goes through, government cannot print money. Cannot, right? So the challenge would be, now the central bank has about 4 trillion treasury bills. So out of that 4 trillion, there are about 4 trillion treasury bills. I think central bank holds about 60% of that, which they are going to restructure. This is quite funny at the same time, Sharon. So what central bank does is, what is a treasury bill is, the government says we need money, and there are 3 things that have been mentioned in that piece of paper. The amount, let's say 100 rupees, interest rates, let's say 10%, and the maturity time that we are going to repay, let's say 10 years.
That's all.
That's all, right? So central bank holding these treasury bills means basically central bank taking that piece of paper from the government, and they are giving the money from their wallet or like the printed money to the government. Now when the maturity period comes, central bank holding it, so they have to pay. So what they need to do is, again they have to give that by from the, unless you have to make it from the taxes, otherwise again you have to print the money, central bank, and give it. Now in this context you can't do that. So we have to check on that angle as well, what would be the forecast and how are we going to manage that situation.
So you're saying for the longest time what the government really did was, when the maturity period comes around, they go back to the central bank and say, look here, we don't have enough taxes, so could you roll this over?
Absolutely. So with the new act, it is not possible to do. I mean, there's a grace period, but afterwards it will not be possible to do. So then that means we have to earn more revenue. Otherwise, it may become unsustainable. So that's what we have to keep in mind.
But Dhananath, looking back at how Sri Lanka has been functioning now, we've been having independence for over 70 years. What really happened at the end of the day was, because of this rollover kind of strategy, or the option to roll over this, no government was really interested in increasing government revenue, because it's not always politically expedient to do so. Increasing government revenue means getting people to pay the government more than what they're already paying. And judging by the reaction of Sri Lankans to all of these debt restructuring programs and really reformulating of the economy, nobody's really happy with that. I don't think it's only limited to Sri Lankans, but even people outside the the country as well. Nobody likes to pay extra. So don't you think that the government will be more cautious, knowing that if they have to pay these ISPs back and there is no option to roll over, they'll be more cautious in how they spend?
That can be one possibility. But of course, as we know, our experience wasn't that, Charlene. We have always had very high expenditure and low revenue. And also the challenge is also to grow the economy. Because if you grow the economy, then you can earn definitely more taxes. Because when you are growing the economy, for VAT, for income tax, basically there will be more revenue streams coming in. So in my experience, we always tend to kick the can down the road. So that's why I'm cautious whether this debt restructuring also is an attempt to kicking the can down the road and considering another restructuring after a few years' time when we really again go through a similar kind of a situation that we realize that we can't pay. But having said that, it's again two bad choices, equally two bad choices. You have the EPF funds, you have the banking sector, but ideally, in my view, it has already been restructured through inflation. So the return for EPF has to be compared with the inflation, because otherwise it doesn't mean anything.
Right. So Dhananath, also, well, you spoke about expanding the economy, of growing Sri Lanka's economy, but at least in the years that I remember of and in the years that I've studied of about Sri Lanka's economy, usually how Sri Lanka's economy usually grew was by pumping of a lot of money into the economy. It was not real growth. So right now, Sri Lankans are experiencing a reality check.
Absolutely. So that's the problem, Charlene. Everyone took that approach to get more debt and try to grow the economy. That's why we had like a debt-driven economy. But ideally what could have happened is to drive the economy more based on trade. Where we do trade with the neighboring countries, we export more, we import more. And there are
fixed laws.
Absolutely, fixed laws. We go for free trade agreements, and then you grow the economy. And when you grow the economy, and when you do trade, of course, you have become competent, because we are competing with a global standard. Because for you to trade or for you to export, you are competing with all the other countries in the world, because you have to be competitive in terms of price, quality, everything else. So that's why if you recall, when Advocata presented this 7 economic reforms, one main reform was on global trade, because without trade we will again hit the wall if we don't make sure that the economy is grown. And to do that, we have to have a lot of reforms needs to be done. That's why we have to look at this debt restructuring, because generally Sri Lankan people think there's like one solution, one fix for all the problems under the sun. So that is not the case. So we have to do this debt restructuring, we have to do the trade reforms, we have to do the state-owned enterprises reforms, because most of the debt has been taken by the state-owned enterprises. We can't continue to pay that, otherwise we will again hit the wall after a few years.
So there is another debt restructuring that's coming down the line as far as the state-owned enterprises debt is concerned?
It is based on the restructuring plan. So basically either the government can absorb the debt or they can sell it with the debt. So it is depending on the investor how they want to take it forward. But definitely it has to be a very comprehensive plan. It is like, you know, at rugby there's a defense line. Just because you can run fast, you don't run fast, because that means that you are diluting
right into the defense line.
Exactly. You are basically you are diluting the strength of the defense line. So it has to happen simultaneously overall as a collective effort, because otherwise when you try to do something and think that everything would be perfect, that is not how I see things, Charlene.
Dhananath, before we cross into a commercial break, just a quick question. Can there be a perfect plan in this domestic debt optimization program?
I do not think so, Charlene, because as I said, whatever the plan that you bring out, someone can make a concern. If you say banks, they can say, okay, what are you talking about the stability of the bank? If you think EPF, they say, okay, what happens to the pension funds? I think there's like a perfect plan. It's all depending on, based on the person. It's like the glass is half filled empty, or half empty. So likewise, I think it's a debate, but of course there are valid arguments from both sides. But that's what it is. It's like when you have two bitter choices, of course we know the other choice is also bitter, but it is a matter of weighing what is less damaging. So I think that's how we have to see it.
We'll cross over to a short commercial break and bring more details on this debt optimization program that Sri Lanka has embarked on, or presented and passed in Parliament in a few. See you on the other side.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
ICC ලෝක කුසලානේ සඳහා සුදුසුකම් ලබා ගැනීමේ තරගාවලියේ සුපර් 6 වටේ බටහිර ඉන්දිය කොදෙව් සහ ඕමානය අතර තරගය ජූලි 5 වනදා උදෑසන 11:30ට TV1 ඔස්සේ.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsline on TV1. We're in discussion with Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata. Dhananath, getting back to our discussion on this domestic debt optimization program. Now, the whole reason why Sri Lanka is embarking on a domestic debt restructuring program is so that we can restructure our external debt. Which was really the beginning of this issue entirely. We were facing a forex crisis. We couldn't pay back our international loans. Paying back local loans, we did it through the rollover policy, of course, that we discussed just a little bit before. But the bigger problem here, would I be correct to say that the bigger problem here is restructuring international external debt?
Yes, that is about 50% of the problem. So now the process has to be, since this has been approved, we have to again go for negotiations with the international sovereign bond holders and our bilateral creditors, including India, China, and get them agree on what they have proposed to cut down the domestic, the international debt. So that is a bigger component because that's where the, bigger chunk of the problem is. So it's a constant negotiation process, Charlene, and I hope they will agree. I hope that the legal advisors and the financial advisors may have already had some level of discussions with the respective creditor committees appointed by the bondholders. So if things goes well, hopefully they will agree and we can finalize the plan and start the negotiation process and execute what has been agreed.
But Dhananath, this is of course a process of kind of trying to convince, appease a lot of parties, so many parties that one couldn't even quite count and quantify for all the parties that are really being or have to be convinced about this program. So according to your expert opinion, and the plan has already been made, the plan has been presented, passed in Parliament, the domestic debt optimization program. Initially, you said that 95% or kind of the target that we're going for, debt to GDP in this domestic debt optimization program isn't enough. Do you think that that will be a concern raised with among the external creditors? Do you think that they will bring it up and say, look here, what has been done is not enough, we need more? Do you think that's a legitimate concern?
They can be, but generally, Charlene, no one wants to really restructure their debt. So if they say to reduce it further, that means they also have to do a bigger contribution. So I don't think they will say that. Because no one wants to compromise your debt, but they will also check the sustainability, because otherwise if you again agree and if you can't pay again, then it will be a bigger problem. Because the logic of debt restructuring is no one first want to restructure your debt. You always say, leave me out, pay my money, I want my money. That's the basic tone. And then if you agree for a debt restructuring, it's like, the size of the pie. It's a constant size of the pie. So the more people that you bring to the process, the less burden that you have.
So the pie being the burden?
Pie being the burden. So if you agree for a debt restructuring, they will say everyone to absorb. So they will say, why don't you get the local debt? Why don't you get the other bondholders? So they will come up with those things, because then their burden would be less. That's that's generally the dynamic.
And when you say bringing it down to a lower rate, debt to GDP means making the pie bigger.
Exactly. So exactly. So basically making the pie bigger for them to have, like, that means they have to share more burden if they have to bring the if you have to bring the debt to GDP further down. But what I recommended was on the benefit for the Sri Lanka. If we can bring down the debt burden, because we have multiple problems. Our debt burden is high, our flow is a problem. We have a lot of debt that we have to pay. Our interest rates are also high, and the cash flow is also a problem. So to do that, the more that we can reduce the debt burden, the more that we can recover from the economic point of view. Because when you have a massive weight on your shoulders, it's very difficult for you to run fast.
But then, Dhananath, just a counter to that, you said we have cash flow problems, we have liquidity problems. In the face of all of this, really, the amount of burden that you can put on the general public or all the parties involved in this. Again, you're saying we should go for a greater debt restructuring program so that to further reduce the debt burden on Sri Lanka. But don't you think anything more would be the straw that breaks the camel's back?
Yeah, I think more has to be coming from the external side. Since now we have taken from inflation, since the general public has taken some burden, and the pension funds have taken a significant burden. You can always, you should negotiate with the other side. Look, we have taken a big burden through inflation and through these measures. So you give us a better deal. I think ideally that should happen.
That should be the tone.
That should be the tone, because that negotiation has to be strong in my view. But again, this is a very technical process where the experts are being handled, and it has to be also the international expert. That's why the two
international companies have been retained,
because this has to be negotiated under the New York law and the London law. So these are all legal repercussions. What has been happening in other countries? What are the examples set by other debt restructuring processes? This all has to be considered. But again, it is just, I think, because IMF target is just a guideline. As I always say, just going with IMF target won't rescue Sri Lanka's economy. I mean, it's a guideline. They are here to provide us assistance, but we have to have a much deeper plan and a comprehensive strategy to overcome on all issues. So that's how I see the context, Charlene.
But then again, Dhananath, there were also people who said that the IMF plan is too optimistic. It's too far-reaching. We can't really go that far. So how do you strike a compromise here?
Yeah, I think the IMF plan is just at the, I think we have to go beyond the IMF program, because Charlene, 95% debt to GDP ratio is expected in 2032. That's 10 years from now. So do you really want to have like 95% debt to GDP ratio after 10 years? And again, we don't know what environmental issues that we have to face, what other geopolitical issues that we have to face. So that's why I always say one option is, if you can't bring the debt burden down, let's grow the economy, because that also brings the debt to GDP ratio down, because that's the denominator. When you expand the denominator, your ratio comes down. So I don't think IMF program, of course they have given some indications, but it is that we have to, our policymakers has to take a much better, because we understand the local context, not the IMF. We understand what are the social indicators, what are the social dynamics, what are the risk factors. We understand it better. And we have to go for a proper restructuring of the entire economy. And without that, just because of the IMF program, we won't be rescued. If that has happened, as you all know, this is the 17th time. In last 16 times, we could have had a better choice. But again, after 16 times, we were pretty much where we are. So, yeah.
Dhananath, one final question, because we're running out of time. People, of course, are paying very close attention to the domestic debt optimization program and everything that's happening in the economy here in Sri Lanka, because they've really understood how decisions of policymakers, of people we elect, sometimes not even think too much when we, go cross that vote at the polling booth, how much their decisions can affect our life, our standard of living, the future of our very children. So they've really understood that, and now they are awake. But there are those who feel a bit helpless, as they have been, their opinions or their take on the situation has been left out completely, because we are in a representative democracy. You can't really go ask everybody what they think about this program before it's passed in Parliament, and there is also no election. So, any advice on you on how these people can come to terms with the things that are happening now and things that will continue to happen in the foreseeable future?
So, I think the biggest lesson, Charlene, basically people of Sri Lanka has taken the burden, not anyone else. So, if we appoint wrong policymakers, this is what we have to go through again and again. Through inflation, we have compromised our wealth. Through EPF funds, now we are going to do another compromise. So likewise, as a result of appointing wrong policymakers, mismanagement coupled with the misfortune and misallocation of resources, we have come to this point. So in moving forward, I think people should demand the policymakers appoint the right one, and also to do their civic responsibility to make sure that these reforms are done because the fundamentals of an economic function is, I mean, you can't avoid it. It's like gravity. If you want to, if you want a rocket to be sent to the orbit, you have to adhere with the gravitational rules and regulations. So same for economy. I mean, you without having a dynamic economy, you can't solve it. So we have to adhere with those rules and push our policymakers. And sad, it's elections have been postponed. I think because the democracy has to prevail. Because by postponing the elections, it will set a bad example. And of course, people, it will also explode because people's pressure, the tolerance levels, they won't explode at the same time, but they will come step by step.
Like what happened last year. Nobody really expected such a huge protest and such a move in or such a drastic change in Sri Lanka's political atmosphere. Dhananath, since you said that people need to perform their civic duties, just one follow-up on that. Paying taxes. That has increased significantly. Now, the tax net is to be increased significantly by the end of this year. By the start of the next year, everyone in Sri Lanka is expected to have a tax file. You might have an income more than 100,000, you might not, but you are expected to have a tax file. When I speak to a lot of people that I meet on a day-to-day basis, their argument is, why should I really pay taxes if the government is going to misuse my money? So, which should come first? I'll pay taxes and hold the government accountable, or the government shows me some transparency and accountability and then I pay taxes?
Yeah, this is Charlene, a chicken and egg situation. Like, you know, the government says you pay the taxes and people will say, why should I pay when you misuse my tax money? So I think both sides has to, again, it's like parallel it has to happen because government should indicate that we are assuring more transparency and people should also show better, better sentiment to pay taxes. So I think it has to happen, you know, both sides. But my view is, by limiting the size of the government, you can reduce also the tax burden because our government sector is very, massively, hugely expanded. So those are the things that I would recommend, but it has to happen from both sides, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Dhananath Fernando, CEO of Advocata, for joining us and, of course, simplifying these extremely complicated processes that Sri Lankans are undergoing right now. Just like Dhananath said, if you vote bad policymakers at the next election, you will continue to suffer. Take care and God bless.